Okay, so Thomas Jefferson, when he's writing this, and he says, there's all these bad things that the British are doing, and if your country is going to break away from another country, it can't be for little trivial reasons, that it has to be some pretty big deals. And so what he wanted to make was a statement, not just a statement for the king, but a statement for the rest of the world about why these United States wanted to separate themselves and the ties that bound them to the British. So he starts to list them all off, and he starts all of these sentences with the words, "he has." And they're like, "he has impressed our soldiers on the high seas," which is like kidnapped them and turned them into British soldiers. "He has taxed us without giving us representation in the British Parliament. He has forced our citizens to quarter British troops in our homes." And they go on and on and on. And so there's all of these different complaints that he has, all listed with he. So the question is then, who's the he that Thomas Jefferson refers to?
King.
The king, okay? So that becomes the list of grievances. It's the longest part of them. There's 30-some bullet points of complaints that he had. Then the last part of the Declaration of Independence is the Resolution of Independence, which basically says, when you add up all these things together, that you see that there's just so much here that now separates us and divides us rather than unites us, and therefore we declare ourselves to be free and independent. What's interesting here is by the time that this is published and sent to the king and made known throughout the colonies, we were already at war with the British. Okay, the Revolutionary War had already begun. So, what are the three sections of the Declaration of Independence? Because they might appear again somewhere. What are they? Number one,
Statement of Human Rights.
Statement of Human Rights. Number two, List of Grievances. And number three, Resolution of Independence. That's just kind of like a quick little refresher thing just to make sure. Helps you remember. Retrieval process, that sort of stuff. Okay, now, so we have declared our independence. We're currently fighting the British, and we need a way to kind of carry on government and make decisions that affect our country while this war is going on, and eventually once we win it. And so when we win this war, we create the first form of government that we have here that is unified of all of the states by this time. And that document that created that first political form of government that we had was called the Articles of Confederation. It began in 1777 and lasts about 10 years. And during that time period, it was put into use, but it was set up much differently than what our Constitution set up our government today. It was really more of a loose union of these different states. It gave way more powers and control of decision making to the states rather than the national government. The states could oftentimes supersede what the national government wanted to do. There was no real president during this time of the Articles of Confederation that had any sort of effective power, nor a really effective executive branch of government for that matter. The judicial system consisted only within states, so you had really no matter of settling disputes that occurred between people or between different states themselves. So what could they do? They could coin money. They could make treaties with other countries, including signing the peace treaty with the British. They can send and receive ambassadors to other countries, including Thomas Jefferson went over to France and was actually in France while the Constitution itself was being written, and to create a postal system. But without the power to tax, without having a real president and a national judiciary, there's not much that they're going to accomplish, and the weaknesses become more than what the country can bear. And so basically, what needed to happen was some sort of event that was going to trigger the need to either reform these articles or to replace them entirely. And that key event that's going to take place here is going to be this thing called Shays' Rebellion. So one of you had that up there as something that was a little confusing from what you had read. So there's this guy by the name of Daniel Shays. And Daniel Shays had fought in the Revolutionary War. And one of the things that soldiers in the war had been promised for helping to fight for our independence was a pension that they would get beginning in whatever year it was, maybe like 15 years after the war was over. And Daniel Shays says, okay, great. Then he goes back to farming in Massachusetts, back to his home, and begins to, his life as a farmer along with several other people. Well, year after year of bad farming occurs, droughts happen, crops are failing, and he's going bankrupt. And the bank wants to foreclose on his farm. And he then demands that the government pay him early this pension that he was supposed to have received so that he could keep his farm. And he can't contact anyone within the government to be able to pay that because nobody says that they're responsible because there's no real executive branch within the Articles of Confederation. So it really goes nowhere. And the bank is saying, we want our money, we want our money. Well, there's several other small farmers in the same area where Daniel Shays is in Massachusetts. And what they decide to do is they decide to, in their local town, to go storm the armory. Okay? Like, what's an armory? Place where they store weapons. So they go storm the armory, take the guns, and then they go march into like City Hall and they take over the City Hall building. And they hold the people there hostage and that sort of thing. Well, here then you have these bankers and what they wanted the forfeiture of all of their debt. They wanted the government to tell the banks, too bad, you're not getting your money. These people fought for our country. You're just going to have to deal with it. And the banks, for their part, said, whoa, wait a minute. You can't just not give us our money because, you know why? It's our money. And if we aren't getting payments from these farmers, then we're not going to be able to loan more money back out to people who need it to start up businesses or buy new homes or maybe start a new career in farming. And so here you got this situation where you'd have the farmers versus the landed, wealthier banker interests. And so in the Articles of Confederation, it's going to support more local decisions and control like that. But if locally they would have decided to eliminate the debt of these farmers, that could have been a trend then that would have spread to other communities and other areas where people were starting to fail on their mortgages. So then that would really affect who? These wealthier banker types. Who are these wealthier banker types? Who are your wealthier people of the country? You think you know some people? Do you think Alexander Hamilton's a wealthier banker type by this point?
Yes.
Yes. Do you think that James Madison is a wealthier banker type by this point? Yes. Do you think people like Sam Adams and John Adams are a little bit wealthier by this point? Do you think they're going to have a problem if now they're not going to be able to make money? Yes. And they don't want to see this, what they felt was anarchy, spread to other areas. So they squash Shays' rebellion. They send in troops and they kick Daniel Shays out. Too bad for you. But because of the fear that this could spread to beyond Massachusetts to be a problem in all of the different states, they decided to hold a constitutional convention. And this happens in Philadelphia in 1787. Delegates come from the 13 states, actually 12 of the 13 states. But they are not very representative of the American people at the time, which were mostly poor, uneducated, white farmers. Okay? Most of the people that went to this convention were very wealthy, well-educated white males that were relatively old. And those then are going to be the people that are going to make all of the decisions that affect then everybody. So James Madison, has all of these ideas, and he and actually what he does is he really keeps a very accurate diary of discussions that take place there, and drafts the first working version of the Constitution, and then presents it to everybody else, and then they start debating the things that he had in there. And then they would meet during this constitutional hall during the daytime. They would lock themselves in. and like pull the shades and stuff so nobody could see in what all of these really, really famous, important people are doing. Then at night they would leave and they would go to the local taverns and they would have dinner and they would sit around in booths off to the side in smaller groups this time, and they would have these conversations probably over a couple of drinks and just hushed whispers sort of thing. But all of the rest of the people in Philadelphia are seeing them do this every night. And so what do you think people start to feel about this? Do they become skeptical? Are they wondering what all these people are doing in there? Are they maybe, like fearful of what they're plotting and planning in there? I would think so. So anyway,